So we really, really appreciate your turning out here month after month. And we are going to continue to have talks every month through the rest of this year. There are schedules in the back, but highlight next month we have Dr. Bob DeLong, also Noah Fishery, coming to talk about his many years of research on seals and sea lions in the Channel Islands. So that's another one that make sure to put on your calendar. So tonight, I'm really pleased we have two speakers. We have Dr. Milton Love, who's with and we also have Dr. Gary Yokovich. I thought that they would not bring their books here, so I thought that I had to bring the book to at least let you know that these books have been published in books on fish and rockfish, but they actually did come with a couple boxes of their own.
Milton doesn't go anywhere without.
I don't go anywhere without those books. I had a son who just graduated from Oberlin, $35K a year, 5 books.
So there is one book that has been in our visitor center for a long time by Dr. Love, probably more than you want to know about the fishes on the Pacific Coast. It's very entertaining. And then this is a new book that was written by both of the speakers tonight, The Rockfish of the Northeast Pacific, which I just started reading earlier today, and everyone will be in love with rockfish, and you'll learn why rockfish are magnificent if you read this book. So, just a brief bio on both of our speakers. Dr. Milton Love is a research biologist at the Marine Science Institute, University of California, Santa Barbara. He's conducted research on numerous economically important marine fishes in the Northeast Pacific, including over 30 years of work on rockfish. Dr. Gary Yoklavich is a research biologist and leader of the Habitat Ecology Team for National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Fisheries at the Santa Cruz Laboratory. She has conducted research from California to Alaska and is well known for her research on reproduction, age, growth, and habitat assessments of West Coast rockfish. So with that, I will turn it over to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Fabulous turnout. I feel like I'm at the improv. I can go, so what do you do? Kind of embarrass you. That'd be good. So tonight I'm going to talk for a while about rockfishes in general. And we'll figure out how fabulous they are. And then Mary will actually talk some science stuff, because she's like the heavy lifting brains of our operation. So she'll talk about that. And we actually have a third speaker here. I have the Rockfish here. The Rockfish has requested a couple of just a minute to talk. So I don't know what's going to happen.
I'd like to thank you all for coming. I know you're kind of disappointed that you're going to have to wade through Love and Yoklavich before I talk. After they're talking, I want you to be very polite while they're talking. I don't want you to start stamping your feet and saying, we want the rockfish. Going over against them. Try to be polite. Try to be nice. You're going to be nice. Actually, you're going to say you'll be nice. I ain't going to get off the stage until you tell me. I can outweight you because I don't actually breathe. I actually pretend. So like I can stand here until the sun explodes. You gotta go to school by the time you're 5. So you gotta. Okay, you outweigh me. Never mind. So after they're through talking, we're gonna have a little session. If you want, you can ask me questions. I've been around a long time. 183 years old. A lot of life experiences here. I saw my mom caught filleted and eaten. How many of you can say that? Actually, there are 3 of you who said you raised your hand. Well, this is an unusual crowd, clearly. So I just want to let you know that I am going to come after they close. Okay. You just never know what's going to happen. So when I was 10, I lived in Santa Monica until I was 18.
And all I did was, from the time I was about 5, was I fished on the Santa Monica Pier, Malibu Pier, on party boats. I had no life, in essence. I chased women unsuccessfully, and I killed fish. That's what I did. Successfully, very successfully. I was actually deckhand on a party boat in Santa Monica in the early 60s. Did a little commercial fishing in college. So I've seen a lot of those industries. When I was 10, my father took me out on a half-day fishing boat, the Lenbrook, in 1957, and we fished for rockfish. And it was the first time I'd ever done that, and it just blew me away. We caught maybe 10 or 12 species of fish, all rockfish, in like an hour from the same little rock pile. And they were all different colors, they were different sizes, some of them were spiny, some of them were not. It was really an amazing experience. It was like Saul on the road to Damascus. Well, no, it wasn't quite that epiphanic, but it was pretty epiphany-like. And that's what really started me on rockfish, and I lacked so little imagination, I've never changed my mind about my interest. And I've worked on rockfish since. So I will start the show and tell by going over rockfish with you, and then Mary will talk about the kind of research. So let's see, we need the lights, and we need all those clothes. And I have no idea which, we need to turn the thing on. Thank you. I'm a Luddite. I just don't know. I have a very rich interior life, but no exterior life. It takes a minute, I think, to power. If you have questions while I'm talking, you can make yourself known somehow. Well, that's horrible. You can't really see it very well. Better. It'll be better with time? Like evolutionary time? I'm only going to be around another 30 or 40 years. I eat a lot of garlic and drink pommes. Oh, very nice. So this is a rockfish. This is so cute. This is a baby black gill rockfish. Mary and I do a lot of work, as she will tell you, from a submarine, a little 2-person submarine. And I took this picture just on the other side of Anacapa Island in about 1,000 feet of water. The fish is about 2 inches long. It's just cute as a button. So there's a typical rockfish. There, if you're just, I have a web page at the university, Love Lab, and of course our motto, we get paid to think so you don't have to. If you're interested, there's all sorts of stuff on there. As I pointed out to some people, I have tattoos of fish. I have a whole page devoted to people sending me in their tattoos of sea life. So there's all sorts of weird things on there. I have a bunch of business cards that have the URL. You can take those from me if you like. This is our other new motto, home of faith-based rockfish research. Because what the hell, I'm kind of an eco-hooker, you know what I mean? Rockfishes, okay. Mary provided me with one of these little things. They're sterile. Oh no, I'm sorry. So rockfishes are found primarily in cold and temperate waters, and actually most of them are found in the North Pacific. There's about 70-odd species on our coast. That's the most anywhere. Maybe 30 species off Asia. There's a couple species down here. There's actually a new species, we think, there, a second new species, one at the Cape of Good Hope, and about 4 there. But this is really where the action is. They probably evolved, actually, on the Asian coast. 15 million, 20 million years ago, came over here, and then they speciated like bats out of hell. Just amazing how fast they speciated. You have all these very closely related fish that are very closely related but are different species, and it's like unique among fishes, and in fact it's unique among most animals. And no one actually knows why they speciate so quickly. But even last year, Vermilion rockfish, I'll show you a picture of Vermilion rockfish. Fish that fishermen call red snappers. Turns out it's actually 2 species, genetically. But until last year, no one realized it. I mean, they're just amazing animals. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of them on the Pacific coast, but the closer to red you are in this chart, the more species there are. The highest number of species are off Southern California. There's about 60 species. They decrease as you go north, and we don't actually know a lot about the coast here, but they clearly decrease as you go south. Something very strange happens here, actually with a lot of fish around Kodiak Island. A lot of rockfish just end right in this area, and a lot of other species end coming eastward too. There's probably a temperature shift right in there that blocks survivorship of fishes in both directions. But the area around the Santa Barbara Channel has some of the highest numbers of species anywhere in the world. As I say, rockfish have been around a long time. This is a fossil rockfish that was found in the diatomite pits that are found up around Lompoc. There's 2 big open pit mines where they mine diatomite, which is used in filter systems, like aquarium filters. But it's also, diatomite is nothing but fossil diatoms. So any fish that happen to have died in there were probably long, deep embayments, 12 to 15 million years ago. Any fish that settled to the bottom got covered by diatoms. And there's a lot of fossils, including fossil rockfish. What's interesting is all the fossil rockfish there, and there's a number of species, they're all very advanced. It's not like a bunch of primitive rockfishes, which implied that they actually evolved further back than 15 million years. We just don't have any fossils. There's, as I say, a lot of closely related species. These are 2 species that are extremely closely related. This is the Gopher rockfish and the black and yellow rockfish. The only way you can tell them apart predictably is color. These tend to be this kind of tan and pink, and these are either black or brown and yellow. And that's a lousy way of telling species apart. If that was a good way, there'd be like 3 species of humans, because we come in all kinds of colors, but we're all one species. But if you look genetically, there's a very subtle difference between the 2, and we think there's very little hybridization that occurs. But that's the kind of examples you have when you start dealing with rockfish. It's a very difficult group to come to grips with. Rockfish have internal fertilization. That is, the female rockfish does not shed eggs into the water and then the male comes and fertilizes them. The male actually inserts an organ that kind of looks like a penis into the female, injects sperm, and then the female stores the sperm, we think in most species, for weeks or months until the eggs are ready to be fertilized. And then, magically, we don't know, says, okay, boys, go ahead. And the eggs are fertilized. This is part of a mating ritual that this species does. This is off Japan. Off Japan, people see mating rockfish all the time. And on the Pacific coast, people have almost never seen it for any species. And in fact, when you talk to Japanese biologists, they look at you really funny. You go, well, we've never seen that. And they go, well, we've got, here's a photograph, here's a glossy, here's a porno website that we but if you think about it, the 2 groups have actually been separated for millions of years. There's been very little genetic interactions between the 2 sides of the Pacific. And even though these are rockfish, they may have set up a whole different set of mating rituals and so forth. Larvae, as I say, rockfish have internal fertilization so that the eggs develop into larvae in the female, and then she sheds larvae, which are competent. That is, they don't drift completely aimlessly. They can actually swim to a certain extent. The larvae remain in the water column, usually between the surface and maybe 150 or 200 feet down, and develop into little juvenile rockfish that look just like fish as opposed to larvae within a month or so. Mary actually did a lot of work on development of larvae and how long it takes and what they eat and so forth. The female actually feeds the young inside her uterus. It's not just, she's not just sitting there letting them develop. There is nutrients that go from the female to the larvae. Rockfishes produce various numbers of eggs and therefore larvae. The small species, and remember 70 species, you get some that only live to or grow up to be like 5 inches long, and you have some that literally are 3 feet longer. The small ones may produce 10, 15, 20,000 eggs a year, and therefore larvae. The big ones may produce 2 million eggs or larvae, like a cowcod, the ones that have a fossil of it that Mary's going to talk about. Maybe a big one will produce 2 million young a year. This is just from the book. We figured out that to me, all the larvae look the same. And we made a pinwheel of all the different kinds. And when you look at them, they're very small, and they actually look like little bits of snot. And that's with little eyes, eyed snot. And the people, there's like 15 people in the entire world who specialize in telling apart the larvae of rockfish, and they'll just go off on these. It's like listening to Dorothy talking about the yellow brick road. You know, it's like you say, well, they just look like snot, and then they go, oh, look at the position of the little black dots, and you can't even see the black dots. I mean, let alone the position. It's like belonging to a cult. It's like belonging without the Kool-Aid, is what it is. So the fishes, the larvae drift around, then they turn into little juveniles. The little juveniles do various things. Some little juveniles actually take up life around drifting kelp. Kelp breaks off from the kelp bed, drifts around for months at a time sometimes. And some species of rockfish seem to be have evolved to take advantage of this substrate that's drifting around. This is a little split-nosed rockfish. It's probably about an inch long. And then when they become ready to settle out, they'll settle out in 500 feet of water, 1,000 feet of water, and take up a benthic, the bottom existence. These are little tree fish, which will live in kelp beds when they get older. But during this period, they're drifting around kelp. And then you have other species of rockfish that will drift around as little juveniles for a while and then settle out at the bottom at a fairly small size. This is a little vermilion rockfish, or red snapper, as the fishermen would call it. They're this kind of charcoal black color until they're 6 or 8 months old, and then they very slowly start turning red. Someone asked last night when we gave this talk what this thing is. This is a brittle stone. This was taken off Anacapa Island. Anacapa, in the last 5 or 6 years, even more, has just been plagued. Now I shouldn't say plagued because it's a natural situation, but there's a hell of a lot of brittle stars out there. They're piled up on top of one another in some places. This kind of tells you what happens with the numbers of very young rockfish over the course of time, and that is not every year is a good year for baby rockfish. Bad things can happen to you. If you're a larvae, you're drifting around, things are eating you, you're trying to eat stuff. If there's not enough to eat, you starve to death. If the currents are wrong, you get cast out to sea and no one ever sees you again. Because of that, for most rockfish, not every year is good for reproduction. And this gives an idea of boccaccio, a very young boccaccio. What you see is you see good years like this, and then bad years, really good years once in a great while, and then not so good years. The other thing that and Mary will address this more, that you tend to see in boccaccio, which is an overfished species, it's down to a very small fraction of its unfished population. You see that the peaks get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and all of a sudden down here, like, there ain't no peaks. And that partially may be because oceanic conditions are bad, oceanographic conditions, but also because there might not be that many adults producing larvae by the time you get out here. So there's several things going on, but the take-home message is that you get these boom and bust periods when some years there's a lot of little babies, other years the babies don't survive. Rockfishes have been historically of great economic importance, not just in California, but all the way up into the Bering Sea, ultimately. These pictures were, this picture was taken in the 30s off Point Sur near Monterey. At the time, most rockfish were taken by hook and line, very efficiently. There was a lot of rockfish. A lot of these are boccaccio. I think there's some vermilions in there. It was all hook and line. You just lay hook and line out in an area you thought had rocks, pull them up a few hours later. It's a very, very efficient for the time way of catching fish. So there's a big commercial fishery. In the 70s, gill netting became really popular, particularly in the Channel. Ventura Harbor, Santa Barbara Harbor had a lot of boats who specialized in gill netting. Rockfish, gill netting is a very efficient way of catching fish also. And trawling. If there's any single way of most efficiently catching some species of rockfish, it's by trawling, basically lowering it up to the bottom and dragging it on the bottom. Most of the big trawl fisheries occurred north of us, particularly in the Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska. These are Pacific Ocean perch, which is a kind of rockfish, not a perch. And the primary way, virtually the only way of catching these is in gigantic trawl nets. The Russians and the Japanese first were the ones to overfish them in the Gulf of Alaska in the 50s and 60s. They were then cast out of the 200-mile limit that the Americans set up, and the Americans busily finished wiping the rest of the fish out. Human nature there. So that was commercial fishing, big time, for a long time. And then there's been a lot of sport fishing. Sport fishing actually goes back at least to the gold rush period. This is a woodcut taken, that was in the Alta California, which was one of the San Francisco newspapers. I think this was 1856. It's called A Pleasure Trip to the Farallones. Everybody is throwing up, including the dog. The major thing you catch at the Farallones are rockfish. So that's what they were doing, and that's what the people did. So they're popular even then. And well, I mean, when I was a kid, and well after I was a kid, rockfish were big time. By the 60s, rockfish were, but in the 30s, party boats would fish for rockfish in the winter, when things like barracuda were less abundant. And so it was a winter fishery. By about the 60s, when Jack Ward started Cisco's sport fishing here in Oxnard, he started fishing them almost all year round. And people became kind of addicted to catching rockfish. And I remember coming up here and fishing on the Footprint, which is a reef that's just outside Anacapa. And I mean, I probably saw, in the course of a couple of years, 10 or 15,000 boccaccio taken off that one feature throughout the winter and spring. This is a hidden reef, kind of a sequence of shots from one day at Hidden Reef, which is out by Santa Barbara Island. Same kind of thing, big boccaccio, cowcods. Those are the big important sport fishes, rockfishes in Southern California. And both of them are vastly overfished today. There I am, busily overfishing the rockfish population myself. 1960, boccaccio, and a copper rockfish taken. This is all in Santa Monica Bay. I probably am personally responsible for wiping boccaccio out of Santa Monica in the 60s. And there's my tattoo. Cowcod, that's my totem. You know how different people have different totemic animals? I like boccaccio or cowcod because they're large and phlegmatic. And that's my goal in life, in my interior life. Large and phlegmatic. Many rockfishes live a long time. That's actually what makes them, if not unique, very unusual. The oldest rockfish that we've ever aged, anyone's ever aged, is 205 years old, which was a rough-eye rockfish caught Ketchikan, Alaska, about 6 years ago. And if you think about it, that fish was alive when, like, Thomas Jefferson was president. It's a long time ago. The way we tell how old rockfish are is by looking at the bones in their ears, their otoliths. If you slice them, or sometimes just look at them unsliced, you can see rings, and they'll lay down a ring a year, most species. So all of these little things here are annuli, or yearly rings. Mary, this is actually a photograph that's out of our book, and Mary created these little guideposts to kind of tell you something that happened during the fish's life. When it was first drifting around as a larvae, the otoliths are only about this big, but the bigger they get, of course, the bigger and deeper the otoliths get. So it matured around 1940. The El Nino is there. Balloon trawls, which was the first successful otter trawl for rockfish on the Pacific coast, the 50s and so forth. So I saw this and I thought, well, maybe I can have guideposts too, things that happened in years that were of interest to me. So we have these. Kim Philby recruited as a spy for the Soviet Union, 34. 200th anniversary of James Madison's birth. Thanks for the Bill of Rights, which we actually, to a certain extent, still have. U.S. Senate censures Joseph McCarthy, 1954, one of my favorite guys. Federal judge overturns Postal Service ban on Lady Chatterley's lover. You can certainly hoist a few to that, huh? First public offering of Microsoft, 1987. Milton could have been a millionaire if he had any sense whatsoever. Let's see. Microsoft stock. Buy a doobie. Microsoft stock. So when we put all this together, Jim, who is here and helps us immensely on stuff, and who's like the best marine mammalogist on the Pacific coast, I say it because no one else will about Jim. He said, well, can I have a year too? And we said, so he has the So what I'm going to do now is kind of roll through the rockfish, the ones that you can Most of these you'll see in the Santa Barbara Channel or outside the islands. A few are rare in the channel, but I threw them in because they're of interest. And we'll go from kind of shallowest down into deepest water. Virtually every habitat in the channel, in fact, virtually every habitat in Southern California, has at least one species of rockfish and sometimes numerous species of rockfish. This is a very nearshore one. This is the grass rockfish, which you tend to find in the water 20 or 30 feet and shallower. I've taken, at Point Sal, I took one that weighed 6 pounds out of a tide pool. So you can get them intertidal, but mainly they're in like 10 or 15 feet of water, right on the bottom and in caves. In the same kind of habitat, a little deeper often, these are tree fish, which are fairly abundant here, more abundant as you go to Catalina and places like that. Tree fish? Tree. No one actually knows the derivation of that name. It's an old name. If you read people like David Starr Jordan, who was an ichthyologist in the 1880s, 1890s, and the first president of Stanford University, he called it a tree fish, but he didn't make the name up. So it's an old name from before 1880, and no one has the least idea where that name came from. Most of the names, the early names of rockfish, are Sicilian, Spanish, or there's a Greek name or two. Mainly Sicilian, though, because that was most of the fishermen were Italian or Sicilian. So those are the first names, like Boccaccio, which means big mouth. Speaking of mouths, tree fish have these red lips or pink lips, and what they'll do is they're territorial, and they will actually open their mouths real wide toward each other, and one assumes that the color is kind of a warning color. A number of these nearshore rockfishes are territorial. Here's 2 black and yellows duking it out over a territory. Or French kissing. This is a kelp rockfish, which is normally found in kelp beds. A number of my slides are actually from the offshore platforms here. Much of my research, when I'm not working with Mary, involves assessing the fish populations around platforms and comparing that with the fish populations around natural reefs. So and I'll talk a little bit about that as I go. But in the upper parts of the platform, sometimes you see fishes that you wouldn't expect there. For instance, kelp rockfish, even given their name, are actually quite abundant around some of the platforms, actually right off here, for instance, in the upper parts of the platform. You go a little deeper. I thought that was amusing too, by the way. You go a little deeper. This is a copper rockfish, a very important sport and commercial species, from about the Santa Barbara Channel to about British Columbia. What's interesting about them is they come in all kinds of colors. They come in bright reds. They come in this is a very common color. They come in really light colors. And for a long time, people thought they were all different species because they look so different. I saw one at Hornby Island off Vancouver Island about 8 years ago. Someone brought it in, and it was black. And I knew the species, but it took me a long time to figure out, oh, it's a copper rockfish. It's just like jet black. If you look at the water column in nearshore waters, this is a very common species. This is the blue rockfish, which is abundant all down, actually down to Anacapa, but it really kicks in the further north you go. And off the central California coast, it's incredibly abundant. Where it hasn't been fished down, they're very easy to catch. If you're near a port, the reefs that are near ports tend to have fewer and fewer fish in general, and fewer blues because they're really easy to catch. You find them in these big schools of 5, 10, 15,000 fish in areas that aren't fished very heavily. San Miguel Island used to have huge numbers of them. And they feed primarily on gelatinous plankton, like small jellyfish, tunicates, things like that. Things you go like, how could there be vitamins in this? You know, it's like just a cellophane going through the water. Not a lot of roughage, so they're rated. Reach a certain age, that's important. Just for you kids out there. This is the species I actually did my PhD dissertation on. This is the olive rockfish, which hangs out with blues, usually in little groups. But it doesn't feed, it feeds primarily on fishes and squids as opposed to feeding on gelatinous zooplankton, which the blue rockfish. They're called Johnny bass by fishermen. These are 2 other midwater fishes, even though they're on the bottom. This is the Blackrock fish and the Yellowtail rockfish. Both of those are big-time sport and commercial species further north. By the time you get particularly off Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, these are multi-million-dollar fisheries, particularly Flavitus, the Yellowtail rockfish. Is that overfished, man?
Flavitus now.
No. You go a little deeper, particularly off our area. This is the brown rockfish. Very typical habitat, kind of low-lying, broken rock. They'll associate with anything. And in fact, in general, fish, not just rockfish, fish really don't care what they associate with. If they're programmed, genetically programmed to like habitat, rough habitat, they don't care if it's an oil platform or a sewer line or a rock. They just don't care. They just like to either hide in it or look at it. In fact, with brown rockfish, you can go out here into 100 feet of water, let's say, onto sand bottom, and there's like 5 sand dabs there. And you put a tire out on the bottom, and you come back in about a month, and there'll be like 8 brown rockfish there. And they're not hiding. They're actually just looking at the tire. Very intently, and they have that kind of, you know, people who take too much yoga? There was a guy who ran for city council in Santa Barbara last year. He had great ideas. He was a yoga instructor. He owned a yoga place in Santa Barbara. And I listened to him during a debate, and he had no affect whatsoever. And I'm thinking, like, this is an overdose of yoga. I mean, he talked like this, and he could have said anything. He could have said, "My nipple's on fire." And I like what he said, but I'm going like, I just can't stand that. So I mean, this is kind of that kind of thing. My ovaries are on fire. You know, it's the same kind of thing. You go into a little deeper water. We're now into like 150, 200, 300 feet. You start getting brighter colored fishes. The rockfishes that are in shallow water tend to be blues and greens and browns. As soon as you get into 150, 200 feet of water, they tend to be reds and oranges and yellows. And that's because once you get below about 60 feet, there is no red light. And so anything that has red pigment actually looks black. So these fish, even though in the lights of either the camera or the sub, they look bright orange, they're actually black underwater at this depth. This is a starry rockfish. It belongs to a group of rockfishes that have these lighter colored blotches on the back. There's about a dozen, a little more. And they've all evolved in the last 1,000,000 years, which is like blazing fast. And in fact, several of the species seem to have evolved in the last 50,000 years, which is like nothing. I mean, they're just going like bats on a hill. This is a close relative of the starry rockfish. This is the Rosy rockfish. It's about the same depth, closely related. Got the spots on the back. We tend to see a lot of these small fish. I mean, a Rosy gets to be about a foot long. The starries get a bit bigger. They tend to be the abundant fishes on the reefs that we see. Small fish. Big fishes are almost all gone. Not completely gone. I'm not saying that you'll never see a fish bigger than 1.5 feet on these reefs out here, but they're not very common. And on reefs that, boy, when I fished on sport fishing boats, I literally saw thousands and thousands of big fish come on it. We will take the sub there, and we will see a handful of big fish. What we do see are astronomical numbers of little fish. And the reason that there's so many little fish is like there's nothing to eat them because we've caught all, or essentially all the big ones. So you tend to see very high abundances of these small fishes that are kind of like weeds. They take advantage of a situation. They probably didn't live where the big fish lived before, but now the big fish are gone, they're all over the place. This is the archetypal example. This is called the Pygmy rockfish. They get up to be 8 inches, 9 inches, a foot long. You see swarms of them in places that they probably did not live before. These big rock piles used to have big fish. No pygmy in his right mind or her right mind would go there. But once the big fish are gone, hey, this is great, man. It's a cave. I love caves. The other species that you see very heavily, it's another dwarf species. This is the square spot rockfish. Ironically, you can't see the square spots. But you have to take my advice that there are little square spots there. This fish gets like a foot long. This is a big sport fish now. People go out on party boats, and this is kind of what they expect to catch. If you off Orange County, you drink a lot of beer, and you catch your limit of square spots. I mean, this is like going up into here, expecting to shoot a mule deer and shooting voles, you know? Oh, I got my limit of voles! Did you? You realize that the bullets are larger than your prey. Oh, I don't know. Boy, this is a bad situation. This is a bad situation. This is a flag rockfish. Flags, when we take, every time we go down the sub, we always carry a camera. And by this time, all of us know that we have 1 million pictures of flag rockfish, but you can't resist because they are so lovely. What's interesting is, this is the bottom of platform Grace, which is one that's out here about 8 or 10 miles. There's one little area at the bottom that always has flag rockfish. It's probably the same ones every year. If you turn off all the lights, these things look like zebras. Remember? I mean, this is black and this is white, and it's probably a way of disrupting their appearance so that predators don't see them as easily. So I have, I'm sorry.
How deep are you
Grace is 450 feet, approximately. We have lots of photographs of them in all shapes. Look, a flag rockfish. Oh my God! Flag rockfish. Oh look, so this is cool. Mary is going to talk about a big survey we did on the Outer Banks in the Calcutta Conservation Area. And this shot was taken, I think, at the 43 fathom spot, which is kind of located near Santa Cruz, San Clemente Island. And it points up that to a fish, what we consider junk is home. Okay? Here's a big old spool. It's got a bunch of cable on it. And look at all the little flag rockfish living on it. They're not going, ah, cable. They're going, oh yeah, cool. Cable. Something to look at. You got cable. Another one of the dwarf species in about, this picture's at about 450, 500 feet. This is a half-banded rockfish. Again, a very small species. You can find them in schools that are so large sometimes when you're looking out the port of the sub trying to count other fish, you can't see any other fish because of the numbers of this species. We do see some economically important species. This is the Vermilion rockfish. Well, we don't actually know what it is now. Up until last year, I said it's the Vermilion rockfish. But now there's 2 species, and no one's quite figured out how to tell them apart visually yet. Genetically, they're separate. This is one of those things that people call red snappers. This also was at platform Grace in 450 feet of water. The platforms, what we tend to see at platforms, the mid-waters around platforms are nursery grounds for rockfish. And sometimes we will see 400,000 or 500,000 or more young rockfish around the platform.
Wow.
Depends on the year, because some years all the little rockfish die, and you see almost none. But on typical years or even good years, you'll see hundreds of thousands of them. And you usually actually see more little rockfish around platforms than you do on natural reefs, because there's no big fish at all around the middle of the platform, so nobody's eating you, so you survive better. Also, if you're a little rockfish drifting around looking for a place to settle out, who are you going to find? A platform that's like 500 feet tall, or a reef that's like 5 feet tall, that's down about 400 feet? Well, you're going to find a platform. So it's easier for pelagic juvenile rockfish to find platforms than to find a natural reef. So they tend to be very good nursery grounds. And at the bottom of platforms, you tend to find higher densities of big fish than you do on natural reefs, because there's very little fishing around most platforms. So they act as de facto reserves, marine reserves. De facto meaning they weren't intentionally created as reserves, but they act that way. And I actually talked to a guy who works on platform Gill, which is the platform out by Ancapo. This is like 5 years ago, to find out how much fishing there was. I mean, there's a bunch of people who work there. And he said, well, the first week you work on a platform, you fish. He said, but after about a week, you get tired of that, you get off a shift, all you want is a dove bar. And I said, oh yeah, well, it's understandable. And he goes, yeah, now that Veneco has bought Platform Gill, we don't get dove bars. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. And he goes, I don't like the apples now either. I'm going, okay. And I'm thinking, like, what am I supposed to do here? I mean, are we going to have like a labor moment here? Does he want me to sing Bread and Roses with him? What? Old, like Joe Hill? I know those songs, but unfortunately it kind of drifted off that, but it was kind of a tender moment. Closely related to vermilion rockfish, this is a Pininger, a Canary rockfish, big, sport fish too, but a hugely important commercial fish from Central California all the way up off of British Columbia, and an overfished species. This gives an example of, on a good year, when there's good recruitment of small fishes around a platform, this is what we will see. These are boccaccio. They're all about 6 months old. They're about that big. This is platform Gill, which is located right off you guys here. In about 140, 180 feet of water. There were, we estimated, 38,000 of these fish around platform Gill. Huge numbers. And there were virtually, and we looked actually on the natural reefs in the channel, there were virtually no little boccaccio in that year at all. But there were lots on the platform. And that's kind of my point, is that platforms tend to be better nursery grounds than natural reefs do over time, not every given year. Here are adult boccaccios. You don't find high densities of adults very much. This is platform Gale. There's nothing magical about platform Gale. There's just not a lot of fishing pressure there. So fish are allowed to survive and get bigger. What it comes down to. Cowcods. Mary will talk in detail about the cowcod survey we did. Very important, economically important, both commercial and sport fish, down to very low levels, but extremely photogenic. We love to shoot cowcod. There's a baby one that's about 8 inches long and a sponge. That's what they look like when they're out. They're really quite remarkable looking creatures. They get up around 3 feet long, but we almost never see them out. When they're adults, they like to hide, and this is what we usually see, like that. Or you see the reverse. You'll see a 3 foot long one with its head in a hole and all the rest of its body sticking out of the big. And you know that a big shark could come and rip its butt off. Isn't there selection against just drifting around? I love them. They're so cute. A couple other species that are found. This is a platform Gale. Again, 740 feet of water, so we're now getting deeper and deeper. This is a Mexican rockfish, which is far more abundant off of Baja California, all the way into the Gulf of California, but we get a few big ones off of Gale. This is a green spotted rockfish, related to the Rosies and the Starry. See the spots on the back? Looks like a boy and his dog. This is, now we're in quite deep water, like 900 feet of water. This is, these are Pacific Ocean perch. This shot was taken off of Adak Island in the Aleutians. They're far more abundant in cold water. Used to be a huge fishery for them, now very small fishery because there are relatively few left and you're not allowed to catch them yet. This again is from the Adak Island area. This is the rough-eye rockfish. This is the species that the 205-year-old fish was representative. Back to Anacapa Island. This is a bank rockfish, one of the deeper living rockfish. This was sitting in a sponge. This is on the backside of Anacapa. Anacapa drops off real fast on the backside, but there's some kind of rocky slope that goes at least to 1,250 feet because we dove that deep. And this is in about 1,100 feet there. And now we're into the really deep living rockfish. This is an aurora rockfish, which isn't abundant at all until you get down into 1,100, 1,200 feet of water. And then this is a black gill rockfish. Big commercial species, but again, quite. So that's my thing. Now the real, the real science, the hard science woman. That's what we call it. Let me tell you. Hard science Mary. Hard science.
Okay, I'll vamp for a few minutes while Mary. So is that okay?
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe anything he said. Because he's just look, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a rockfish. I know stuff. A lot of things he said, guesses, hypotheses. There's just nothing to it. But he always makes it so smooth that you bought into it, haven't you? Maybe you should run for office, huh?
I hope you guys can appreciate how difficult it is to follow. This is the second night that I'm doing this back to back. We've worked together for many, many years, and it's always fascinating to listen to him. I'm a rockfish nerd, I guess, and so is Milton. And I'll sit here and listen to him all night long, but it's really tough to follow something.
I'm sorry.
I'm just here to talk about information, data, research. So the thing I do have going for me is I'm going to show a 5-minute video clip of what it's like to be on some of these offshore banks that we've been talking about. So that is one plus. If you stick around halfway through, we'll switch and see if we can look at the video. The kind of research that I do and that Milton does is really centered around groundfishes. Groundfishes are not just rockfishes, but fishes, any of these marine fishes that live on or in or over the sea floor. So that's our focus, and we particularly focus on various aspects of their habitat. The way the federal government manages all their fisheries is in fishery management plans. And the Groundfish Fishery Management Plan is their most diverse plan. It has 83 species in it. Most of them are rockfishes. Up here, 55 species. There's also flatfishes and some sharks and so forth. But this is how we manage our fishery in a plan. Most of those fishes live in deep water. They live in water greater than 50 meters. The disconnect between research on habitats and these fishes is that they're living in deep water mostly, and most of the habitat work that we've done up until recently in the last 10 years or so has been in shallow water. And that's because it's cheaper and easier to do scuba surveys in shallow water, less than 30 meters depth, than to go into deep water. It's relatively expensive. Tools were not developed easily to use off the shelf for scientists to go into deep water and study them. So we have a disconnect there. And the other kind of disconnect is that it's really difficult or impossible to accurately survey some of these species that we're going to be talking about and their habitats when they live in these complex habitats. The kind of conventional method that we use to survey fishes is trawl surveys, as Milton said. Big trawl surveys get very little, if any, information on habitat, on bottom-type habitat. It's very good information on some of the very large schooling species of rockfish, the species that we're most interested in that are living in and on the bottom. Trawl surveys are not really the ideal, effective way to survey them. So for the last decade or so, Milton and myself have been developing the tools to go down and actually look at these fish visually, observe them, count them. It's expensive, as I said, so we need many, many partners to do this. And what we've been doing is characterizing their assemblages of these fishes and their habitats. And the way we do this, the approach that we take, is to combine geophysical information, meaning remotely operated sonar surveys, multi-beam side scan sonar type surveys to map the seafloor, combine that with fishing information, combine that with direct observation from submersibles. And the goals that we have are really basic. We want to improve the assessment of these groundfish in these complex habitats, and we want to describe what we're calling, what the federal government is calling, essential fish habitat. What kinds of habitat are really important to consider additional protection for these fishes. Now, rockfishes, when you consider the food web, and this is from Monterey Bay, but this example can easily be depicting the food web offshore here as well. Rockfishes are center stage in this food web. Here's juvenile rockfish right here. And along with krill, squid, and anchovy and sardines, they form the basis of the food web for almost all marine vertebrates that live out there. All the seabirds, many of the pinnipeds, sea lions, harbor seals, many of the whales, dolphins, porpoises, and a lot of the fish eat baby rockfishes. So they're really important. As Milton said, they're not just important to those marine vertebrates, but they're also important to us marine vertebrates that go out and fish for them. And we've been fishing for rockfishes, putting a lot of pressure on them for over 100 years. Both the commercial guys and, here's an example, and I think Milton showed this as well, of the recreational fishery. And this is from Southern California, where we have just hundreds of thousands of hours on the ocean fishing for rockfishes over many years. Here's a very large specimens of cowcod. We'll be talking about those, and also large specimens of boccaccio rockfish. Both of those are officially declared overfished by the federal government right now. And this is what the result of all that fishing pressure over those years has been. These are graphs of 6 of the overfished species. Here they are, all rockfish species. And it's really showing the steep decline over the last, 40 years, and it's continued on past this. From 100% population decline down to less than 2% for boccaccio, less than 5% of their original population for cowcod. When they fall below this overfish threshold of 25% of their original numbers, they're officially declared by the federal government overfish. And that means that we put in management practices that are going to help rebuild to this 40% level. And some of these fishes are to rebuild to just 40% of their population. It's going to take upwards of 90 to 100 years. So not in our lifetime will they be rebuilt to 40%, but hopefully some of the strategies that they're putting in place are going to start to do that, to slow the effort down. This is an example of boccaccio rockfish, and here's that decline that we just saw from boccaccio, gold line. The blue line, and I think Milton showed this very same set of information, is age 1 recruits. What this is showing for boccaccio is the spike in 1977 of the very, very successful year class that we had. Those young fish that were born in 1977 are now surviving in 78. And here's a big spike. This spike right here has carried the fishery, which is landings right here, and the biomass. So the biomass here and the fishery for many, many years because they're long-lived species. So when you get a big spike like that, it carries the fishery as you fish it down, and we don't get any more big spikes, you start to have this slide. So between overfishing them and the environmental conditions changing, we get this kind of a situation. Now there's some limits to management. Why have we been unable to really effectively manage these guys? Some of the reasons for it are that variable recruitment we just talked about, multi-species assemblage. Many of these species, and here's a good example, there's probably 4 or 5 species right here living together, and many of these rockfish species live together on these rock piles. It's really hard to manage for the robust species that aren't in bad shape when you've got mixed